Okay, so pandemics, right. They're everywhere these days. Movies, TV, even that whole sourdough bread baking craze. It's like we're obsessed. But are we missing something? You sent us a ton of research on past pandemics, and today we're going on a deep dive to see what we can learn.
And let me tell you, these historical outbreaks, they've got some seriously relevant lessons for us today.
That's what I'm talking about. This isn't just some dusty history lesson. We're talking about events that totally reshape societies, right? Empires crumbled because of this stuff. It even, and this is crazy, might have helped end feudalism. Yeah, stick around for that one.
Absolutely. We've got to start with the big one, though, right? The Black Death. Everybody pictures Europe, the plague, millions dead. Grim stuff, but it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, exactly. We think we know the story, but your research, it goes deeper. Like the Black Death's impact on labor, it's wild. So much death, and it leads to workers having more power.
It's tragic, but it makes sense, right? Supply and demand. Millions are gone. Suddenly the people left, especially those who work the land. They're in high demand. Landowners needed them, which gave those workers leverage they never had before.
It's kind of mind-blowing. Peasants, who were used to barely scraping by, could suddenly demand better treatment. You want your fields harvested, things are going to have to change.
That's exactly it. Your research even points out this shift. Before the plague, labor was abundant and cheap. After, scarce and expensive. But it went beyond wages. This challenged the whole system of feudalism, which relied on having way more workers than landowners.
So, the Black Death, as horrific as it was, kind of accidentally planted the seeds for change. Talk about unintended consequences.
And we're still seeing those consequences play out today, believe it or not. Think about all the talk about worker rights these days, the gig economy, the balance of power between employers and employees. It all goes back to these massive historical shifts, moments when the old ways were completely disrupted.
Wow, it really makes you think about how connected it all is. Okay, ready for another pandemic curveball? Ancient Rome. At the height of their power. Yeah, they got hit with pandemics too. Blew my mind when I saw that in your research.
Yeah, a lot of people think pandemics are a modern problem. But the Antonine Plague, that happened when Rome was at its peak. It's a reminder that even empires can be vulnerable.
And we're not talking about a small outbreak here. 5, maybe even 10 million dead. Crippled their military. And get this, your sources suggest it might have even helped Christianity spread.
Yeah, the plague definitely weakened their legions, which impacted Rome's hold on its territory. It really makes you wonder how modern nations would deal with something similar.
That's a chilling thought. We tend to think about pandemics as, just a health crisis. But you're right, the effects go way beyond that. They affect everything. National security, wars, even the entire course of history.
Exactly. And then there's that connection to Christianity. It makes sense, right? When the traditional Roman beliefs weren't offering answers during the plague, people started looking elsewhere. And Christianity, offering comfort and hope during such a scary time, well, it really took hold.
It's like the source said a bit apocalyptic, which, speaking of apocalyptic, is a perfect transition, don't you think? We got to talk about the plague that almost DD'd take down an empire. Justinian, quick history lesson. Justinian was this Byzantine emperor who wanted to basically make Rome great again. Things were going pretty well, and then, bam, plague.
Oh, a Justinianic plague. Yeah, makes the Black Death look like a cold.
50 million people gone, cities abandoned, trade routes totally shut down. The source says it was like the apocalypse. And looking back, yeah, I can see why.
This was way more than just a health crisis. It was like the whole world was falling apart. Imagine Rome, right? Back for the dead, about to be great again, and then, boom! Plague wipes everything out, armies gone, economy destroyed. It was the start of the Dark Ages, right?
It's like history was playing a cruel joke, He almost did it, Justinian. Almost brought back the Roman Empire, and then this tiny little enemy takes him down. But here's what really gets me. The source makes it clear that this wasn't just a Byzantine Empire problem. The whole Mediterranean world was affected. Trade routes, power structures, everything changed because of this one plague.
Oh, absolutely. Even back then, the world was more connected than we realize. The Byzantine Empire was a major player in trade, so when it collapsed, the impact was felt everywhere. Think about it. Trade routes shut down, markets collapsed. People must have been terrified. It reminds us that we're all connected, even across oceans and continents.
It's like even centuries ago, one event could set off this chain reaction across the entire globe.
Okay, before we get too lost in ancient history, let's jump ahead a bit to a pandemic that might hit closer to home. The Spanish flu. Even my great-grandmother used to tell me stories about it,
The Spanish flu.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might not feel as ancient as the Black Death or Justinian's plague, but it's got some eerie similarities to what we're dealing with today.
For sure. And it wasn't picky about who it infected either. This flu, as the source says, it went right for young adults, which was different, right? Most pandemics, they target the very young or the very old. But this one, imagine a whole generation of young, healthy people just gone. It's hard to wrap your head around the impact, even now, losing that many workers all at once. It had immediate consequences, of course, but it also forced societies to rethink everything. Labor, the economy, how to rebuild communities. Those are questions we're still grappling with today in a lot of ways.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The source points out that the Spanish flu, as devastating as it was, it actually changed how we think about healthcare, specifically the role of government in healthcare.
Right. When the Spanish flu hit, it became painfully clear that the existing systems weren't enough. People were demanding more from their governments, more funding for research, a more centralized approach to healthcare, you know? They wanted to be prepared for the next one.
And isn't that fascinating? It's still a debate today. Should healthcare be a right? Should the government be more involved? It's amazing to think that those conversations, which feel so urgent right now, actually have their roots in a pandemic that happened over 100 years ago.
It really shows you the power of pandemics, right?
Yeah.
They act as these catalysts for change, often in ways no one could have predicted. They force us to confront things we might have been ignoring.
So we've covered a lot. Plagues, pandemics, empires collapsing. It's a lot to process. But I think it's time to step back and look at the big picture. What does it all mean? What can we, living in this pandemic-defined world, actually learn from all of this history?
I think the thing that connects all of these historical pandemics, and your research really emphasizes this, is how interconnected we all are. Even the most advanced civilizations, the most powerful empires, they can be brought down by something we can't even see.
You know, it's funny, right? We think of history as this boring thing that happened a long time ago, but the more we dig into it, the more we realize that it's not really past at all. It's still shaping the world we live in today.
Exactly. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. I'm sure you've heard that one before.
100 times.
Okay.
Okay, so big takeaways. What should our listeners here in the 21st century take away from all these ancient outbreaks? I mean, we've seen what happens when societies aren't prepared. What makes us think we're any different?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think history shows us that, no, we're not immune at all. Your research actually does a great job of laying out the big takeaways, you know.
So lay it on me. What are the big lessons?
First off, we can't ignore this. Global cooperation. It's not optional. It's essential. Black Death, Justinianic plague, Spanish flu, they all show how connected everything is. We can't just hide and hope for the best.
Yeah, what happens over there comes back to bite us eventually, right? I'm guessing strong public health systems are key too.
100%. We see this again and again. Public health matters. And not just like having enough hospitals when things get bad. It's about watching for outbreaks, catching them early, making sure everyone can get health care. Basic stuff.
An ounce of prevention and all that, right. But knowing it and actually doing it, two different things, sadly. That's where politics and all that messy human stuff comes in, I guess.
Exactly. And your sources, they get into this. It's that push and pull between what individuals want and what keeps everyone safe. It's a dilemma that never really goes away. How do you convince people to do things for the greater good, especially when they're scared?
It's a tough one. Back then they had quarantines enforced by like dudes with swords. Now it's about trust, right? Clear information, fighting fake news, different tools, same problem, I guess.
And that brings up a point people forget sometimes. The human side of all this. It's not just about viruses. It's about how people act, what they believe.
Their sourdough recipes.
Okay, maybe that too. But seriously, if you want to handle a pandemic, you have to understand people.
It's like your source says, right? We have to be ready, not just for the virus, but for everything that comes after. The unrest, the inequality, how it makes people lose faith in everything, really.
And that's history's biggest lesson, I think. Pandemics. They don't create problems so much as they reveal the ones that were already there. The cracks in society, the things we were ignoring, they become impossible to miss.
Kind of depressing when you put it like that. But maybe we need to see that. Maybe facing our weaknesses is the first step to actually fixing them.
Now that is a powerful thought. Maybe pandemics, for all the bad, they push us to be better.
So if we could boil this whole thing down to one thing our listeners should remember, what would it be?
It's pretty straightforward, really. We have to learn from history, not just read about it. By understanding the pandemics of the past, the mistakes, the successes, we can actually prepare ourselves for the future, you know?
Because, like we've been saying, The past isn't really gone, is it? It's still here, teaching us if we're willing to listen.
And those who listen, who really learn from what came before, they're the ones who can change things for the better.
And on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive. But this isn't the end of the conversation. We hope this sparked your curiosity. If you want to explore these historical pandemics further, check out the show notes. We've got links to all the research we talked about. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.